Hi, I'm Dan Andersen of Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I work in the Ag and Biosystems Engineering Department, and we're up at Nashua, Iowa at the Borlaug Learning Center. We have 36 acres of research plots here where the primary fertilizer source has been manure. We've had these research plots running manure treatments for about the last decade or so. And over that time, we've been supported by INRC, IPPA, Iowa Pork Producers Association, and then a USDA project called Regen PGC. And really, this current project is looking at timing of manure and then some different cover crop systems, especially focusing on timing of planting cover crops relative to when we're putting manure on. We've done a fair amount of work on timing up here, and it started out we were looking at late fall manure versus early fall manure, knowing that some people are stressed about when can we get manure on in the fall. And we saw huge timing responses. And one of the questions we got is, well, how much different is it when you move to spring? So in this current project, one of our focuses is on fall manure application versus spring manure application in terms of what's the impact of timing on both yield and water quality. And then we added a treatment where we're putting on fall manure yet, but we supplement with some commercial fertilizer in the fall, knowing that timing has been important. So we'll use that commercial fertilizer in the spring enough to make up for maybe some of the challenges we have with fall manure and putting on a little earlier than we probably want to or hope to. But knowing that in order to get done, some manure has to go on in the fall. The other question we got is people are really interested in how do I work with cover crops and manure? And for a long time, there was a worry, well, if I plant a cover crop and then go through it with a manure injection bar, I'm going to have nothing left. And we had done some work to say, well, that's not true. There's still a good cover crop stand left. But we still got questions of, well, should I put my manure on and then drill cover crop after? Should I be interseeding cover crop and trying to put my manure on after that? What's the best answer? And I would say, well, whatever works for you, whatever's the best system. But we currently have our part of this research looking at continuous corn systems with an early seeded cover crop. So putting it on while the corn's still growing, roughly the end of August, beginning of September, and comparing that to a drilling cover crop post-harvest, post-manure application. So that'll really be somewhere near the beginning of November most years. So an extra month of growth compared to a lot more precision seeding and sort of seeing what the impact is on water quality and then corn performance in that type of system. And then the last real part of this study that we have is we know cover crops, especially with manure, can be a little bit of a challenge. We're trying to get manure on, we're trying to plant cover crops. I don't have time to do all these operations. So we're working with some perennial cover crops, so some grass species. In this case, we have some Kentucky bluegrass that we've tried before, continue to try and work with. So that's a system where you plant it once and then have to manage it. So trying to suppress it in the spring, turn it brown. And then we have another one. The field that I'm standing in is a Radix hybrid rugosa cover crop. Again, it's a perennial cover crop. This one's nice because it naturally goes dormant in the spring, a little later than I want to, so we tend to help it along with some Liberty to try and get it suppressed and turn it brown. You can see this has been previously sprayed with Liberty. We've got it turning brown for us, and we're growing corn in the strip-tilled zone. So quite a few things going on. Timing of manure, timing of cover crops, different cover crop selection species, and then just a little bit of some tillage. We have some no-till plots and then some strip till, and that's more of a system comparison. Wherever I have a continuous corn rotation, we're strip tilling just to try and get some of that residue out of the crop growth zone, get our corn off to a little bit better start. And then the corn soybean rotations, I'm going to be what I call a no-till. This is in a corn soybean rotation. You might say, well, I can see where you tilled. I have to put my manure in the ground somewhere, right? So we have a manure injection ban, but it is a minimal disturbance vertical till sort of situation. So maybe not a true no-till, but as close as you can get to a no-till situation when you're putting that manure in the ground. So currently we're on the second year of a 3-year research study. IPPA supported the first year of all the treatments on this study, and we're thankful for that. And then INRC is supporting the second and third year here for us to keep us monitoring at these sites and support doing some cover crop with manure research, which we know is really important. A few general things. Manure supplies about 25% of all the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium we need to support crop production in the state. So an extremely important fertilizer source. Gets utilized on about 20% of acres. So I'd like to see that a little bit more, but we tend to be a little higher with manure rates than maybe some of our commercial fertilizer rates. So some opportunity there. Personally, I think the research suggests a lot of that's due to timing. When we're getting it on early, we're losing some of that nitrogen. And those guys using manure feel like, well, I need to put on a little bit more. I see nitrogen deficiency, and they're probably right, but it was probably a timing impact. So this work is helping to verify that and show the impact on water quality and hopefully help promote moving some more of that manure closer to season or ideally into the crop growth season. And then the second thing is we know we're going to continue to have a struggle with manure application timing. Currently, about 35% of all our manure is applied before November 1st. And November 1st is an important day for me because I'm trying to wait until soils are 50 degrees and cooling, especially with high ammonium manures, which tend to be all our liquid manures, but especially liquid swine manure. And it's just hard to wait. We have 16 billion gallons of liquid manure we need to get applied, about 620 businesses who help us get that done. And while I want you to wait till November 1, in order to get it all applied in a given growing season, oftentimes we have to start a little earlier than we want. So about 35% of it is applied before that critical date. And those acres really probably need a cover crop to help with some of the water quality concerns. So when I think about the cover crop work we're doing here, we did some earlier where we did it with and without, or with early applied manure. So that'd be manure in October, and saw huge water quality benefits. And then the question is, well, how well would it work if it was well-timed manure, right? And so there we were seeing about a 40% reduction in nitrate making tile line with that early manure with a cover crop compared to early manure without a cover crop. When we went to well-timed manure, so I'm thinking roughly the beginning of November, again, with and without a cover crop, we saw about a 30% reduction in nitrate loss. So great reduction, still working really well for us. And then the last question was, well, what happens if they're doing what I want in spring manure? Do they still need a cover crop? Does this cover crop still help? And that's currently what this study is doing on some of these plots. It's spring manure. So when we're standing on this Radix hybrid babosa field, spring manure, not maybe the most common, but about 15% of all our manure is applied in the spring, so still important. And especially if we're going to try and promote moving more of it into the spring, how well do these cover crop systems work, and does establishing at different times make a difference on that? So a lot of interesting things going on. I get to talk to farmers at manure training every year, and for the past 7 years, the number one requested topic has been cover crops and how do we implement them with our manure system. And I think often the question we get is, what makes it perfect? What's the best? And I'll still stand here and say, the best is what works best for you in your operation and getting it set up. But I think it is important to link some of those management choices to both how do we think the crop's going to perform and water quality, and that's what the work here is really letting us do. Economics are extremely important, and we're going to break it into two parts, sort of that manure economics and then the cover crop economics. And then sure, there's some interactions, but we're going to try and focus on the broader strokes to start with. Manure can still be had for generally a lower cost fertilizer than purchasing commercial fertilizer. A few things with manure. It's a complete fertilizer. It has everything we need: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, but it's often not balanced depending on our crop rotation. So when we think about what manure is worth, if you have deep pit swine manure these days, you run a corn soybean rotation, we're probably about in balance for those macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, over that 2-year rotation. But when we choose to use manure in a continuous corn rotation, we're probably not taking advantage of all the fertility. Certainly it's providing that nitrogen, but I tend to be applying more phosphorus than I can remove with my corn. So if I'm starting in sort of that low to optimal zone for phosphorus levels in the soil, that can still work out for me. I'm really collecting all the value. But in most cases, we've probably built up our phosphorus levels in the soil to the optimum zone, and really what we're doing is moving towards that high zone, right? So you might say, well, I'm just putting money in the bank for later. It's a bank account that charges you negative interest, right? We're going to lose a little of that phosphorus before we ever take advantage of it. It's not really our best choice. With that said, it can be compared to things like urea or commercial fertilizer. It does tend to be cheaper, and we can get away with some of that from an economic standpoint, putting it on where we're not taking complete advantage of it. But that means we have an optimizer system and there's room for improvement. So I think when I look at Iowa and say, well, we could supply a third of our fertility from manure, I really want to see manure supplying a third of our fertility. And right now we treat it more in that 22-25% area. So that's a place where we can take a little more advantage and think about systems and doing a little bit better. And the second part of economics is with cover crops. So you can focus on what's the downstream effects, how does it impact water quality, and those are extremely important. But oftentimes we think about how does it impact the farmer's bottom line. And cover crops can be expensive. So at our manure meetings, guys who have beef cattle or dairy cattle where they can harvest it as a silage tend to say, I love cover crops. They give me this forage, I get an economic return from them. And our swine farmers who work with cover crops, some of them will say, yeah, it works great from soil health. I'm seeing these benefits. And others say, yeah, but I see a yield drag, and how do I deal with that? So at the end of the year, we try and punch the numbers on what are we paying for cover crop seed, what did it cost to manage these systems. And then especially in a case like this where I'm planting a perennial ground cover, economics get really important. We have to start asking questions. How long will this ground cover last? And unfortunately right now I get to say, I don't know. We hope this will last roughly 10 years. Our early economics say I probably have to get it to last at least 3-4 years to be as achievable as just planting cereal rye right now. So cereal rye, when I'm planting it, I'm paying somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 an acre to seed it. Something like this, where it was Radix hybrid babosa, it was costing me about $110 for seed. So there's a little bit more investment. So I really do need to figure out how to get more return. And on research sites, because of that, I can try some interesting things about when I'm doing things and say, well, it's research and I know it's going to be dry this fall. I probably wouldn't plant if I'm a farmer. And I look at it and say, I want to collect water quality data. I need to get this plot going. I'm going to do it anyway, right? So every now and then I'll make a decision that I don't think a farmer should make. especially with our Kentucky bluegrass. We planted that in 2021, and it was extremely dry in Nashua. I shouldn't have done it. I had to reseed the next spring because I got almost nothing to grow, and that cost me somewhere around $100 an acre to seed, and I got to do it a second time. Now I can say that learning experience was good. It helps me say we really should wait for a better time to put that seed on, especially when it's that expensive, rather than trying to get it on in that fall. When I think about a long-term system, but those economic choices, when you run into research realities of I need to get this project moving, sometimes have some contradictions. So every year we try and do some economics on how the plots are doing. And I think every cover crop person will say about the same thing. It does cost money to put in cover crops. We have to figure out how to minimize that yield drag. A decade ago when I started doing this, it was with early manure. And my first year, I probably didn't set up the plots as well as I should have. I had about a 20 bushel an acre yield drag. On a brighter note, as we've went along in time, my yield drag has gotten smaller and smaller every year. Some of that is probably me learning to make sure the equipment is set up and it's going where I want to, especially things like getting my corn close to that manure band where it's a little protected and closer to the nutrient source, making sure our cover crops don't get too big and we don't lose too much water, especially in some of the dry years we dealt with. But in truth, over the last 3 years, we've been yield neutral on our cover crop plots compared to our non-cover crop plots. So I think compared to the 20 bushels an acre I started with, we've made some strides. We found some management systems that tend to work a little bit better. Some of that strip till in my continuous corn with cover crops, I think has helped me out, just get the corn off to a little bit better start and moving along. So definitely some opportunities. I know one of the things that farmers have told me they tend to do is a little starter fertilizer in their corn to get it going, especially when they've been fall applied manure before. I don't have a cover crop treatment with that. We do have the just manure only with that boost of nitrogen in the spring to see if that sort of helps get us closer to better timing. But that is something that as we think about what we're doing here and some of the management practices, we want to look at and say, does that nitrogen help with yield? What was the impact on water quality as we start making up a little more nitrogen? All right, so a couple things that have really excited us about this research project. The first was that fall manure with some supplemental nitrogen. Everyone tells me they yield the same. It's what probably our common manure practice is. And the first year at Nashua last year, we had a pretty wet spring. So that would have been a year where fall losses were probably high and a great year to see, does that supplemental nitrogen get me back to where I should be? And from a yield perspective, it worked just like farmers told me. We got back to the yield that we were at with all spring manure, all well-timed fertilizer application. But from a water quality perspective, I could still tell I put manure on in the fall. There was significantly more nitrate that made it to the tile line than any of my spring manure treatments, right? So I think that was sort of the balancing portion of that. Yeah, it covers up the agronomic side of it, but that fall manure is still having some water quality impacts. And I think that was really useful for me to see that split applications can help, but they don't take us back to probably where we want to be with optimum management decisions. The second one I'm really excited about is with that spring manure into cover crops. I'd never seen anyone else try that before, and we get great support as we drive through our field. Our first year showed a little less compaction as we drove our tanker through the field on that cover crop to hold us up. On the other hand, I didn't see the water quality improvement I hope to see with that. We yielded good. Our cover crop had no yield impact. I think oftentimes when we were doing fall manure, I grew some really nice cover crop where I put manure bands down and the cover crop sucked up some of that nitrogen, maybe stole it from my corn. I didn't have that issue with my spring applied manure into that cover crop band, which was great from an agronomic standpoint. But I did see maybe not as large of improvement in water quality. Part of that might have been the year. We were coming off a lot of dry years. Probably some of that nitrate was below where my cover crop could really pick it up. And we finally had enough water in the spring to drive it to the tile line. So I'm excited to see what year number 2 here brings for us, where we're starting maybe with some stuff that isn't as enriched in nitrogen in the soil profile from a few years of not much water movement. And then the last one is from a timing of cover crop standpoint, I really thought that applying that cover crop early would give me a lot more time for growth. And the truth is that first fall, it did. I had about twice the biomass in my early seeded cover crop compared to what I had when I drilled after. But by the time I got to this spring, both those cover crops had the same amount of biomass residue in the field, the same amount of cereal rye that was growing. And I think from my perspective, that's a great finding. It says that even if I'm putting my rye on after I applied manure, after I've harvested corn, I still get the rye in the spring, which is really the time we're most prone to nitrogen leaching, to help hold some of that in the soil and do a good job for us. I think the last thing I wanted to point out is that making sure your technology is working, getting your corn row placement really well dialed in is important. And I think we see that every year in some of our plots. Unfortunately, we have a 5-row manure applicator, a 6-row corn planter, and 5 and 6 aren't the same number. So every now and then you get a little off, and that fifth row is not necessarily right where you want it. It gets into the grass band in this plot rather than being right in that injection trench. So it's further away from my manure. Even when I get some suppression, it's competing with grass for nutrients. So that precision placement, thinking about this as a system, really important for us. And I think that's somewhere where we need to do a little bit more work. And one of the things we tried to do this year is this grass goes dormant. The suppression early in the season helped me get away from, if I have a little error in planting, add some resilience to what we're doing and not have that yield impact. So a couple more years of work needed on that, a couple more years of work needed on how resistant is this? How resilient is it to some of the management practices we're doing, like driving through it with a manure tanker and using it as something to hold me up and reduce compaction a little bit, but maybe it doesn't like my heavy tires driving on top of it as much, right? And we'll see how long that lasts. And I told you I need a 3-4 year investment on this cover crop to make it the same as cereal rye. Will it last that long in some of the manure systems where we're a little bit harder on it and beating it up? So I think there's still some work to be done, but definitely practices that oftentimes you can start thinking about how to put them on your farm and how well they might work for you. So as we think about the type of work that we're doing here, manure continues to be an extremely important fertilizer in the state. So thinking about how we can make the most of it, stretch it over a few more acres, minimizing our impact on water quality, making sure we're getting those agronomic benefits are extremely important. And I'll continue to push timing, timing, timing. We know it matters for manure, but recognizing that that isn't going to be a solution for everyone on every acre is important. And thinking about what we can do when we have to be in that situation where manure gets applied a little earlier than we want, and the options that cover crop provides. So thinking about maybe that system of, should I get my cover crop interseeded early? Should I be drilling it on after I put manure on? Or can I even start thinking about some of these perennial ground covers as the cover cropping choice that's right for me? I think are exciting options for how we can evolve to make sure we're really taking care of our manured acres.